Hey guys, this is Tyler here. I'm here in Estonia. It is December and I am going to talk to everyone about Finland. Okay, so everyone may know Finland is a Scandinavian country. It's in northeastern Scandinavia. It's actually very close to where I live in Estonia, and it's a relatively small country, but it has produced a lot of wealth, and there's an immense amount of both intelligent talent, sports talent, scientific talent, and many other kinds of talent in this smaller country. It's had a very rapid progression in the past 40 to 60 years. Finland, by most modern metrics, is considered a first world developed country. I would say overall it is. It seems to be that way. I know many people from Finland that live here in Estonia and who have traveled to Estonia. My attorney in Estonia is actually Finnish, and it's an interesting country. Interesting enough, I actually prefer Finnish women over Estonian women, and that kind of tells you something about Estonia. But I think Finnish are a little more open-minded, honestly, and just a little better in certain respects. But that was kind of a side note here. In terms of Finland, though, as a MGTOW country, it certainly became one of the leaders in Northern Europe, and I think it's due to many factors. Finland, while it's developed very rapidly, as I mentioned before, has had a huge number of problems that have arisen from all this progress. There's also been a lot of social problems that have came about, and I think with each passing year, Finland, especially for Finnish guys, becomes a less and less desired country to live. Firstly, like all of Scandinavia, the Finnish taxes are very high. The income tax and consumption tax and there are some other type of taxes are like Sweden and Norway at very high rates, and this is across the board for lower income to upper income. One thing to note in most of Scandinavia is that even lower income people do have to pay some kind of taxes usually, at least with income taxes. It's not like in America where across the board it's fairly high taxes. Now, people obviously have different ideals on this and whether it's good or bad. This system is typically the norm for Scandinavia. It's been one of many aspects of the country that have made it very unpleasant for many guys. Keep in mind, though, that Finland shares borders with both Sweden and Russia. People often aren't aware of this because they often remember Sweden, but Finland has a large border with Russia, and this is actually quite interesting because if you cross over the border immediately, it's like a completely different world. It's amazing, honestly. There's a city known as Lappeenranta. It's like in eastern Finland, really close to the Russian border, and this city is actually, in summertime, it actually often has more Russians than Finnish people. It's incredible, honestly. Anyone that knows some history about Finland knows that the northwestern part of Russia, the area that borders Finland, is actually comprised of a ethnic demographic that's very similar to the Finnish people. Along this region, the group of people that was native is essentially the same. It's called Karelia, a peninsula of Russia. These are basically the same as the Eastern Finnish people, the ethnic Eastern Finnish people, because there's basically two main groups of Finnish people, but the ones that were ethnically from Eastern Finland essentially are the same as the Karelians over northwestern Russia, right on the border. Very interesting, which is also close to St. Petersburg. Finland shares borders with Russia and Sweden, and so of course you have two very different societies, or three different societies that are all next to each other. Finland, as I mentioned before, is also very close to Estonia. I'm just like maybe 30 miles from the Finnish border. It's just across the Baltic Sea. It's very short distance, and I would be in Finland. Finland has had both heavy influences from other Scandinavian countries like Norway and Sweden, and I would say somewhat of Russia and just the Northwest region as a whole. In terms of how government sector in the country as a whole operates, I think it's very similar to other Scandinavian countries like Norway and Sweden. It's not that much different, honestly. As I mentioned before, they have very high tax rates. And then if we start looking at how the government structure is set up, Finland has been known as being one of the most egalitarian structures now for many years. They've had laws that have basically mandated that they have to have so many officials that are comprised of women in these positions. Also note that Finland was one of the first countries in the world that experienced women's suffrage. They started permitting women to vote in 1907 or in 1906, which was actually the first European country. And they also have one of the oldest women's association in the world. This kind of just showcases how long Finland has had this mentality for. It's been a long time, this girl power movement. This whole mindset has been in place even before the world wars, way before, honestly. Equality Act of 1987 was another big blow. This is sort of similar to acts like Title IX in USA. This was an act that sought to prevent quote-unquote discrimination and was to quote-unquote advance gender. And what this meant is that in any kind of board or official committees of companies, that at least 40% had to be comprised of women. And this was in 1987. This was a corporate act that was in place for way before this became the norm in the world. In the workplace, no question, has had a lot of feminine influence. They've put a lot of importance on having women in all sorts of public and private sector leadership positions. Of course, Finland had their first female leader, I think in 2000, and she was in office until 2012. They have 6-year terms in Finland, and so she served 2 terms. And then in European Parliament also, they put a great importance on having a lot of female leaders. If you know anything about EU, they have kind of these parliament leaders along with the national leaders of a country. And the parliament leaders are probably most akin to like Congress people in the US. They serve on a national level, but essentially represent each country. And they'll have parliament leaders in all EU countries, including the one I live in, Estonia. It's interesting that much of this girl power influence that has happened in Finland is almost exactly the same girl power movement you see happening now in Estonia, and that has been happening. It's virtually the same thing that's carried over. It's crazy if you look at how Estonia has been transitioning now, and is no question their model here. And as we can tell here, all these acts have put more pressure on guys, and have obviously essentially pushed them out of these environments, because often when they put a lot of emphasis on having female corporate leaders, on public sector government leaders, what it actually does is it pushes more men out of these positions. I think females tend to have more inclination to want to be government leaders than men do. And certainly when they have a lot of power behind them to go into this direction. As I said before, if you look back several decades ago, this has been in the making now for so long. And this was just bound to happen because the recipe was in place to usher in this type of society. This is obviously what's been playing out now. I will say though, Finland, unlike in US and Canada, I think it was not as rapid. Progression was much slower. I mean, we can see this started happening in the early 20th century here. So there was a lot of time to kind of bring in this period. And it probably wasn't as much of a shockwave on the Finnish people like it was, say, in US or in Germany. And going back in Finland also, since 1997, there's been a financial government-sponsored scheme that has placed importance on having more female entrepreneurs. Since this 1997, they've given these loans and grants to female-led companies in Finland to start, and it's been around 11,000 companies that have came about from this initiative, and it's produced 30% of female entrepreneurs in Finland. This is the number of the companies now are female run and owned. This is not that much different, honestly, than stateside in the US. In Canada, they have similar scheme setup situations where they have grants and loans that are directly given to female run and owned companies, or at least partially owned companies. They often get more priority than male-led companies. And this is also happening in other countries at the moment. This has just been happening in Finland for longer than in many places. And of course, remember here that they need to drive schemes from the top down. If you don't have the top controlled to the bottom, it's hard to control the whole structure. And so by targeting from the very top of it, it's easier to carry this whole structure downwards. And that's the mindset that, okay, if we have this being implemented at the highest level, then it's easier for these owners and entrepreneurs to then put in place all the policies on a lower level for employees. From like 2016 to 2019, they've had an action plan to quote unquote shorten the wage gaps and improve equal employment opportunities. This initiative was taken about so that to essentially have more females put in certain sector jobs that they deem as not having sufficient females. And this is really Finland. I mean, if in Finland, if you go through almost any sector, you'll find in government and corporation, I mean, it is filled with females. The police force, in fact, in Finland actually follows the same protocol as the military basic training of Finland, and they essentially have to pass the same basic training. Recently, they've wanted the females to pass the same basic training that the men have to pass, the female police, because there's people out there, more of these girl power people, that think that they should have to follow the same standards, essentially. This is where it gets kind of interesting though in Finland, because I will use the term here, girl power. Finland has a mandatory conscription service. It's been in place for many, many decades. And the military has recently attracted more females, like we've seen in other Western countries. There's actually these pro-girl power people, men and women, that think that this is where it gets unusual. This is a little different variety than what we see in the States. They actually think that the females should have to do the same basic training that the guys are doing. And it also extends to the military. They have to pass actually the same test with the same marks as what the guys are doing, especially within the military sector. But also some of these same pro-girl power people actually think that also within the police sector, because in Finland there's a lot of female police officers and also in the military, but more so in the police. Because note that the police in especially Northern Europe are more similar to municipal workers. I mean, they do have to do some more dangerous work, but it's not nearly as much typically as what you'd see like in Canada or the US or in England. And so there's actually been this recent push for that, because conscription, of course, like in most countries, is only required for guys. And some of these pro-girl power people actually think that it should be for all people. This actually seems a bit odd, but they see this as a sort of discrimination against females. And this is where the Finnish are very interesting in some ways. This is a big mindset difference. And so they think that it's discriminatory for them not to have to pass the same like physical test. And also for them not to be drafted, because drafting or conscription is viewed as kind of a obligatory civil service. Basically, it's kind of the same thing in Estonia. It's seen as kind of a civil service, and so they think that females should also be obliged to complete the civil service. And this is actually something that's it's endorsed by the current leader of the defense in Finland, and this could very well become law soon, that females also have to do this conscription, and that physical testing could also be the same standards. Now, don't ask me how Finnish females are going to reach the same benchmarks. I mean, there's ones that have in the past in military and police, but it would be challenging. I will say, Finnish females are physically, they don't take the best care of themselves nowadays, but physically they have very good genetics. They're very naturally very strong and fit, and they just have the more curvaceous bodies, I think, that are associated with this part of the world. But with that being said, is that practical? The meeting these physical requirements, I don't. Relationship situation is challenging. I mean, many Finnish couples don't get married at present moment because of how the system is. There's both a disinterest in marriage on behalf of both genders, and just simply that I think it's very challenging for good quality guys to find suitable wives or partners. And many guys have been looking abroad for foreign wives in Finland now for quite some time. Probably at least 25 to 30 years it's became more common. There's many Finnish guys that go to Russia, of course, look for Russian wives, because as I stated, right on the border with Russia, some went to the Baltics, especially like 20 to 25 years ago. It was common. There were many Finnish guys that married Estonian wives, and other Eastern European countries, and also Southeast Asia in the past 10 years has become more common for finding potential spouses or some partners. Well, many Finnish people, especially men, tend to be more isolated. They tend to keep to themselves, more introverted. I do think on a whole they do like to engage in some kind of relationship or marriage if they can. So I think there is certainly a larger MGTOW following that's occurring at the moment, but I don't think it's as steady as maybe in some other countries. Now with younger generations, like Generation Z, absolutely. I think this demographic will continue to grow in coming years. The dating apps too are, of course, like in many other European countries, have become very popular. If anyone knows anything, Finland is very tech-savvy country. It's been very tech-savvy now for 25 to 30 years. They actually, of course, launched one of the first major cell phone companies, Nokia, and many very talented programmers, software experts, and people within sciences come from Finland, and they've been very familiar with dating apps now for a long time. Probably one of the first European countries to use dating apps on a large scale, in fact. And dating apps, of course, have been very popular in Finland. Now, Tinder probably being one of the biggest ones. My brother actually has used Tinder in Finland, and he had said it was pretty good for him. This was a few years ago, mind you. And I think also due to the fact many Finnish females don't like having long-term relationships, or they prefer short-term flings, dating apps can work pretty well. But just understand that if you're using dating apps with Finnish gals, you're probably going to have to be a pretty decent quality guy. I mean, Finland is such a, I think, if you're foreign with a Finnish gal, you'll probably have some leverage, but not as much as you would have in a country like Russia or Ukraine. So you'll definitely have to probably have decent amount of game, and I think looks would make a difference here. But some guys would find that often you can't expect too much from a Finnish gal, and my personal experience is limited with Finnish females. I've met some here and there in Estonia, and like I stated before, I do generally prefer them over Estonian, and it really is on a case-by-case basis how dating is. I mean, if some foreign guys may have great success, other guys not. It really depends, honestly, on the guy at the end of the day and what their preferences are, and just simply their style. This is the first part of my video here. I'll be doing a second and possibly third part. Give me your feedback so far, and thank you.